Well, let's start as we always do. I'd like to start at the beginning. So before we get to ideas about conferences and things that students can do today, let's go a little bit back in your background. So can you help us give a little sense before where you grew up and what you were doing before you got to college? Just a little bit of how you got to where you. We'll get to the Parliament and we'll get your political life. But where did you grow up and how did you even have an interest in studying science or medicine?
Well, thank you very much, John. And first, let me say to really thank Professor Monahan. He's been an amazing guide and leader. And in fact, Georgetown is one of the founders of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health. But Professor Monahan has been really an amazing friend and also a guide. Personally, in trying to navigate a new country, a new space, and so I'm deeply grateful for Professor Monahan's enduring support and help as a friend mostly, but also as a guide. And
we're lucky to have you here. That's the important thing.
Well, thanks, John. And also, your ethical compass is always pointing in the right direction. So if I'm wondering, I'm grateful for that. So I am an immigrant times two, in fact.
That's
I
right.
was born in England, and we came over on a boat in the North Atlantic. Not recommended if you can avoid it, if you have seasickness, because the North Atlantic is a rough place. So I was a little boy when we came over with my three other younger siblings. My parents had 5 boys. They would have traded one for a girl any day and tried, but didn't work out. And then we settled in Toronto. And the reason why they left is that there was a lot of prejudice at the time within England at that time. And they asked themselves the question, how could we give our boys a better future? And so they saw, they had options the United States, Australia, and Canada. I still remember this thing, I was 8, and there was this picture on our kitchen table of the Rocky Mountains in the autumn, right? It's beautiful, golden trees, snow-capped mountains, crystal blue lakes. So where do they wind up? Toronto. So I thought, Canada's got to look like that. So I imagine the shock. I can't imagine. So I grew up there and then moved out to British Columbia on the west coast on Vancouver Island, where I trained. But I'm deeply grateful for Canada to take us in, and then practiced medicine for a number of years. But I went into medicine because, as a young guy, this might sound maudlin, but I wanted to make a difference, right?
Sure.
As a kid, I just wanted to make a difference. And we're in a Catholic university, and so I'm Catholic, and I went to Catholic schools. I went into a high school which I call Jesuit Light, because the priests were not as tough as Jesuits, but they had very much a social conscience. I remember, our teachers used to, some of them at least, I had this really tough calculus math teacher. He was impossible. He'd give us, in grade 11, he'd give us the scholarship training, the scholarship test cases for Oxford as a 16-year-old. But his point was, we were all guys, right? It's men's boys' schools. He said, men, it can be done and you can do it. Now let's talk about what's happening in Poland at the gas shipyards. So the social conscience and the social movement was very much inculcated into us by the priests and the lay persons who taught us. And I think that was just part of my ecosystem growing up. But I thought also being an outsider, going to a new country, being the only brown guy in the class, you also develop a certain maybe outwardness looking and maybe a desire to prevent that which may have happened to you. So I wanted to make a difference, and how can you do that as some low middle class guy in Toronto? I wanted to become a doctor, but I also wanted to become a conservation guy. So how do you mix those two? And I did some of that, so I was very lucky. But I went into medicine really to try to make a difference. That's like the beginning and the end of it, was just to make a difference and to relieve suffering and save people's lives.
And when did you? So how did it work in your undergraduate age? When you were at the age of the folks in the room here, where were you in college, and when were you and I can't remember how the system works in Canada when you enter medical training.
So much like here, we do our undergrad. I went to the University of Toronto.
Okay.
But I also, you have to have do other things. So what were those other things? I was really interested in the human condition. So I remember in high school, if I didn't make money, I didn't go to school. So I had to have summer jobs to pay for school because we didn't have any money at all growing up. And I got a job in a jail as a guard, as a maximum security guard.
I have to admit, this is the first I've heard of this.
So I was 19. I'd tell you,
I wouldn't have recommended you for that job, knowing what it is.
I needed a job.
I know,
So
it's a
like,
good, it's good, it's
no
a good
job,
gig, yeah.
No school. It's like, that's brutal. So wherever, if I got a job. So I remember going to the jail, which is a maximum security prison in Toronto, and getting interviewed by the warden, and then the guy goes, "So you want the job?" I said, he sees my hesitation. "Let me show you around." So I remember, I was terrified, right? Like weigh 160 pounds, 6 feet tall, but it was terrifying. But in the process of doing that, had a real opportunity to learn a little bit about people and those conditions. So I tried to put myself in positions that were not comfortable for me, but I could be able to learn about the world. So I remember I used to also be a floor cleaner in a hospital when I was 21. I was cleaning toilets and floors. And I wanted to see, how can I get an experience in a hospital? How would I feel amongst sick people? I have no idea. You're 21, why would you know? So I said, if I like it, being there, this is for me. So I wanted to test myself and see whether or not this was the right environment for me, and I found out that it was. Even though I'm cleaning the floors and cleaning toilets and stuff, you still are in that ecosystem and pick up stuff. So I started to build up some, knowledge and awareness, which helped to guide me. So that's why I went in, and then, I did 3 years, got my degree. Well, I applied after 2 years, which you could do. Didn't get in after 2 years. I was taking both the BCom and the pre-med at the same time in first year. I had no BCom training.
BCom?
Bachelor of Commerce, sorry. Because I thought I need a job, so if I can't get into medicine. Frankly, I gave my chance at getting into medicine almost zero. Because I don't know if you guys did this, but I sat in my class in first year and I went, I did okay and did well in school, but here are the top students in Ontario, all in my 300-person chemistry class. So did a quick calculation of what were the chances of getting in, and they were, pretty close to zero. So I said, I'll stand a chance, but let's go for it. So after 3 years, I was lucky enough to got the marks, got accepted, and went to the University of Toronto in medicine.
Gotcha.
Very lucky.
And so when you went, so you went to medical school, and did you have a specialty?
So I went into medical school, graduated from there, went to do a rotating internship in Victoria. And the reason why I went there is I was the chief medical student at the University of Toronto, then the Toronto General, which is the largest teaching hospital in Canada. I was perplexed by something because, I was a senior medical student and dealt with the organizers of the courses. And I said, I'm getting incredible exposure into how to do double lung transplants, assisting on cardiovascular surgery, doing cutting-edge research on surgery, which I happen to be interested in. But we're not teaching me how to deliver a baby, right? I watched the interns there, and when somebody arrested, their heart stopped, they were recording, they weren't doing. And I went to the organizers, I said, first give us the skills that we can treat somebody, right? And then we can decide what we want to do. And then the organizer said, our job is not to make you a competent physician when you leave. Our job is to expose you to as many things so you can decide what specialty you want to go to. And I said to myself, really? I thought that if we have a good basis, regardless of what you happen to go into, it seemed to me that I want to be able to treat somebody, and then I can decide what I want to do. Learning how to do double lung transplants is not going to help me if somebody has a ruptured appendix and I can't figure out, recognize it and know what to do with it, or deliver a baby properly. So I went to Victoria, where they didn't have any residents, and so you were directly with the staff. So you had huge experience. And then after that, I just went to work, got extra training in trauma and emergency life support, and then went to work in one of the toughest places in British Columbia, which had a high trauma rate. Best place to work, but
This
but
is
also
Vancouver at
fascinating.
this point? No.
I started to work in Victoria, but I
Victoria.
got bored because you were just referring. And then a buddy of mine was working in the middle of my province, Prince George, which is a very interesting place. It was an interface where there were a lot of First Nations or American Indians, which you call here, where there was a fight. You had people with a lot of money. You had people who were poor. You had First Nations people with a lot of social trauma. Mix that together with a young population, and you get an environment where there's a lot of trauma, a lot of sick people who do bad things to each other and to themselves. So from a medical perspective, if you like emergency medicine like I loved, then that's a good place for me to be. So I went there and started to work and really enjoyed it and had incredible experiences. I mean, not to bore you with it, but I used to work on a clinic for people who are homeless and addicted in the morning. I would go with a buddy of mine, fly in by chopper to remote villages in northern British Columbia, where you'd go into, I remember, these communities are small, like 150, 300 people. And I remember walking at night, reading on these cabins, please kill me, right? There was no hope for these folks. You'd go into a hermetically sealed building that the government decided that that's where people should live, and you'd have 15 people living there, grandparents, along with a whole series of people, in an environment that was deeply unwell. And I'll close here, but the interesting thing about my practice, being able to work in emergency medicine, I used to work in jails, both in adult and juvie jails as a physician. So you see the arc of people's lives. You'll see them in your office. You'll see them in emergency. You'll see them in jail. You'll see them in their communities. So you start to tie this together. And I remember sitting on the edge of the bed in the emergency department one day, and I just got so angry, because there's a little child that came in, and I mean, I had a lot of kids like this. And I looked at these kids and I went, you have very little chance of actually having a secure environment. And the things that happen to them, would come to my emergency department, I'd look and going, this was preventable, right? This person did not have to come to my emergency department, but stuff happened to them that were entirely preventable. So I think we're going ahead of ourselves. I don't know why I got into politics.
No,
it leads into why I got into
Well,
politics.
I wanted to set the stage for us getting to your, but so you practice. How long did you practice medicine then in British Columbia?
Well, full time I practiced for 6 years,
Right.
And then when I was in Parliament,
Yeah.
I'd work on my holidays, and that was really important to me because
Well, that's before we get into
Yeah.
your weekend
Okay.
schedule when you're in
Okay.
Parliament. So it's not. So when I get the part that you had patients where you looked at the conditions in their situation and it angered you, and you thought the world could be better and different. But what made you decide that politics was the way to make a difference? And had you been involved in campaigns and politics before, or was that like something that you did only once you started to get involved in life in British Columbia?
just never got involved, wasn't involved in politics because you're so busy in
Yeah.
medicine, right? It's such a consuming profession. Training is consuming. Paying off your student debt, as all of you know, is really consuming, right? So I had to pay that off. So that consumed me. But over time, by doing all of those things, John, and then working in the emergency department, following these people's lives, I asked myself the question. I said, okay, I was in my early 30s. I said to myself, first of all, in the process of practice, and all of you will have this, right, in your professional lives, you'll start to think of things that can prevent bad things from happening. And I got that in medicine. And medicine, I think, gives you that because it forces you to look at the social determinants of health for people, and the political determinants of health, for those of you involved in that, the commercial determinants of health, the social determinants of health, the commercial determinants of health, it forces you to look at those. I didn't have the nomenclature at that time, but you start to get ideas saying, if these things happen, these things could be prevented. I'm one guy, but I'm one of thousands of people across the country dealing with tens of thousands of people being affected in the same way. So I had never been involved in politics before, but I asked myself the question, number one, what's the most effective way of getting these ideas forward and having people a lot smarter than me create better ideas? Like, put it out there and then hopefully attract better ideas that can build something a lot more effective, useful, and affordable, and have that impact, not only for my patients, but also much more broadly. And then I arrived at the conclusion of politics. So then I've got the battle on my shoulders, right? One creature over here is saying, you have a really good life, so it's a lot of fun, you enjoy what you're doing, you love medicine. And then on the other hand, you say, what if you didn't do this?
Right.
What would you say to yourself 20 years later that you didn't even try? You can try and lose, that's okay. But if you never try, what would you think? And that was the fundamental existential question for me. And so I picked this whole shoulder, not that shoulder. I'm happy.
So on your right shoulder, so you decided, but you don't. Most people don't wake up and say, you know, the world's been waiting for me to be a member of parliament. And so how did you decide to get involved? When did the party? How did you? Just tell us a little bit about the system that process you went through to get nominated, to get elected, and to make it, and to start your career.
So I didn't pick there was a new party that came on board.
Yeah.
It was a right of center party. I'm socially liberal, economically be good, strong economic policies. But this party came on board and it was different because as a candidate,
right.
you got to sign a contract that basically said your order of duty is first to your conscience, second to your constituents, and last to your party leader. And I went, fantastic, because I wanted to create a mechanism, a place where I could push things forward, but it would be consistent with my party. It wouldn't violate the traditional party rules that the party goes, we will tell you what to say, how to say it, and what to do, and you advance that in the context of your caucus, which is a way of doing things. But to innovate, which is what I really wanted to do, this was a path that I saw forward. And it wasn't that I felt that, that I had all the answers by any stretch of the imagination. I basically wanted to go down there and people say, that's a really dumb idea, Martin. Here's a better idea. So I wanted to move the ball forward by attracting a lot smarter people with better ideas, rather than those ideas sitting somewhere that never saw the light of day, which I think is such a tragedy. So then I went to the party. Anybody can run. Here's a little question I always ask my American friends, because I love to do this when I say, how much do you think I am allowed to spend in an election? Like, imagine you are all congresspersons, but in Canada, which would be members of parliament. You're a candidate, right? So how much, what's the top maximum? And I'll tell you, if you go over that, you can go to jail. So you have an obligation to just spend what you can spend. There's two parts to this question. What's the top number? And you can put it in Canadian or US dollars, and I can give you the real.
He'll do the exchange rate for you.
Yeah.
Any guess?
What's the top number? Now you have 125,000 constituents, which is not as much as you have here, generally speaking, but that's what you have. We're 1/10 your size. But how much could you spend in a federal election?
Bailey?
$100,000?
Very good.
Is it?
Pretty close, yeah, 125. Yes, very brilliant. Well done. No one gets that right, so you obviously do a great job.
We have a well-educated student
I
body
saw
here.
by the
so.
questions here that
Exactly.
and also your diverse backgrounds and what you're studying. Well done, because you're absolutely right. 100,000 US, and then you're 125 Canadian, and you're spot on. So you actually did the conversion instantaneously. Yeah.
And by contrast, the Harris campaign spent $125,000 in about a second last year. So anyway, but go ahead. But back to this.
That's good. 365 seconds.
Exactly. Right.
That's our thing,
Right?
Fascinating. No, I didn't know that. And then the second question I have for you is, if you wanted to donate, right, to a candidate, say you're running, right? Say Kaylin, you're running. Okay, so you're all supporters of Kaylin. What's the max, and you want to support her candidacy? How much can you give her, top max?
So we know what the spending limit
You-
is.
So how much can you, what's the max you can give? And again, you can't spend more than this by law.
Anyone other than Bailey want to guess? Because she seems to have an inside track on campaign finance laws in Canada.
I just wrote it down, so I couldn't change it.
No.
Anybody?
5,000?
That's,
Pretty
that's a
close.
good guess.
Yeah, well done, yep.
What is the individual donation limit?
No, I'm not entirely sure, but it's around $3,200.
Okay, so-
Yeah, but you're in the ballpark, right? Because some people think, well, $100,000, $1 million, but you guys are doing far better than, frankly, just about any group that I've ever
Okay.
had. So,
So that-
good on you. That's right. And then the last part of this question is that if you're a if you're a company or you are a union, can you donate to a federal campaign in Canada? Yes or no? Who thinks yes?
Anybody?
Who thinks no? So batting 1,000.
I know
This
it.
is great.
People,
Well, spot on.
people
Well-
like Canada more these days.
Well,
I mean, not everybody, but,
no,
um, but anyway, in that scenario, how many donors did you need to get to the max?
it depends on how much they give. A
Yeah.
lot of them were small donations.
Like but you had to raise money. So how many?
We did.
How many people did you? How many fundraisers did you have?
Oh, actual fundraisers.
yeah.
So most people just donate. Our campaigns are very short, so you want to get money before. So I mean, you're always raising money
Right.
for people and visiting people, but generally speaking, fundraisers you might have 3 or 4 fundraisers. But the revenue is
Right.
really the ongoing
Sure.
monies that are donated primarily. And so I ran.
And how long was your campaign?
Well, you have to become
Yeah,
a candidate
right.
first. So how it works is, say we are, right, the four of us, you're actually part of this. So here you go, your 4 candidates are running, right? And then you all raise money, and then you run to be your nominees, and you run over a period of several weeks. Probably, there's no time limit on that, because you're trying to determine who's going to be the candidate for the party. So if the 4 of you are running, that can take a couple of months. They'll run, you'll have debates and everything else. Your members, signed members of your party, will then have a chance to vote as to who they want. And ours was you had to get 50% plus 1. So when I ran, there were 5 of us, so it went down to 4 votes. 4 votes. And another guy and I were the last people, and so I had 4 times we had to vote to actually get that.
Wow.
And the person I was running against was a guy named David Barrett. Mr. Barrett was the former premier of my province, the former governor of my province, the de facto leader of this party politically in the country, much beloved by everybody, and was the incumbent member of parliament in my riding that had never, and this is a new party, so we had never won. Actually, we only had 1 seat in the whole country.
Wow.
So talk about a quixotic effort. But that was the person we were running against, and people gave us no chance whatsoever. But we won.
And so then you won the nomination, so to speak.
And then you run in the election. So
And how did that go?
well, it was a battle, right? Because no one gave us a chance. But I worked earlier, was able to get the position about 6 months beforehand, and then I would just door knock. I researched my candidate tirelessly, knew where his vulnerabilities were, start to study him as a person, and knew how to push his buttons. So on the candidate, when we debated, I tried to take him apart, frankly, and push where his vulnerabilities were, and made him lose his cool many times. So that was beneficial, but also asserting policy that spoke to the needs of the community and the country in a way that I could, because I was part of a party that enabled me to assert solutions to problems of our constituents and country. So I was able to take my medical background.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time in Canada, we were having a bit of a fiscal crisis. Our debt was extremely high. We were going down a very dangerous road that Latin American countries had gone to. So part of the reason I joined was to really get our fiscal house in order, because if we didn't do it, my concern is that the social programs in our country would really be collapsing, including healthcare, and the ability of our country to perform and be economically competitive would be compromised. So, so that's part of what I ran. But those are the tactics and strategies we used to defeat somebody who people gave us no chance of winning against.
So you win, and now you're in Parliament. So what was that experience? How many years did you serve in the Parliament?
Nearly 18.
So
Yeah, that's been unusual.
tell us a little bit about that experience, and particularly how you felt you were able to impact health policy in that role.
Yeah. Well, the first time I walked
any
into
policy
the
role
House,
for that matter.
well, the first time I walked into the House of Commons, I actually was really honored, because being an immigrant
Mm-hmm.
to a new country that gave me an opportunity to stand in Parliament, which is has anybody been to Ottawa and to the House of Commons? Anybody? It's a really beautiful, old building. It's under construction now, but it is a gorgeous building, but much of it like this, but only, a bit more gold and things. So I was just really humbled, frankly, that people had given me the chance to represent them as a 33-year-old. I'm going, wow, this is something. So, yeah, that was quite an experience. So, before that, I was working in Africa during apartheid, South Africa, during a state of emergency. And I went there at the time because it was for those of you in foreign policy, it was a very interesting time. It was on the Mozambican border in South Africa, and I worked in a black homeland in a black hospital during apartheid at a time when there was a state of emergency. So apartheid was crumbling at that time. You know all know about apartheid? Yeah. So apartheid was crumbling. There was a state of emergency by the government of the time. But where I was working, right next to it was Mozambique, which was the poorest country in the world. And what was taking place there was a proxy conflict. Russia, there was Russian radar installations on the border. It was mined, lots of landmines. And South Africa had a policy of destabilizing the countries on the outside to be able to weaken the African National Congress inside. So they figured if they could create and fund rebel groups outside, then they would limit the ability of the African National Congress to set up shop in those countries and use those as staging points to attack South Africa. So it was a fascinating place, geopolitical environment, and I learned a lot. So one of the things I remember is we had landmine injuries. And actually, I left the hospital for the second time, actually. I went there 85, 86, 90, 91, worked there. And I was back just visiting my old boss, and he got a call saying somebody stepped on a landmine. And so he said, hey, Keith, I was on holiday. He said, Keith, can you come to the OR and help me? I go, for sure, Mark. So we went down, and I remember going to the OR, got scrubbed up, went into the OR, and there was this 18-year-old kid. And he was sitting with his leg up like this, so what was left of it. One leg was partially blown off. The other leg was damaged by shrapnel. He's 18 years old. So this kid was Mozambican, and he had obviously just left the poorest country in the world, tried to get to another country, and all he wanted to do was have a future, right? And I looked at this kid who was looking down at what was left of his legs, pouring sweat, and I can't imagine what was going through his mind, right? You're 18-year-old kid, your whole life, one day you just made that fatal step, and then boom, this blew up. And so I said, I want to ban landmines. Frankly, I had a whole list of things that I wanted to do in Parliament. One of them was to ban landmines. Another thing was to have a rules-based mechanism to prevent conflict. How could we work to establish those rules, to have an early warning system that works, raise up a series of known metrics and red flags that can be known, so at least to try to mobilize some effort to prevent things from happening. And so I went into Parliament. I introduced legislation, the first legislation to ban landmines. Long and the short of it, I was in the opposition. The then Foreign Minister, Andrew Ouellette, was asked by a reporter, so Dr. Keith Martin has this bill, bless you, has this bill, legislation to ban landmines. Do you support it? And he said, yes. And I went, wow, that never happens. And so to the government's huge credit, Prime Minister Kachan, they actually took this on and advanced it to make the Ottawa Treaty, which was the fastest international treaty that came into force at the time, and maybe still now. And so it became an international treaty to ban landmines. And I wonder whether or not, I mean, I've always wanted, so philosophically, to actually meet that young guy, if he's still alive, and
Right.
say to him, it was your trauma that at least helped this one person to try to do something to prevent that which happened to you. And there's no way of making anything good about that, but it would have been, and it would never happen, but I just thought philosophically,
Right.
if you at least knew that.
You saw something and you tried to act on it
Yep.
in the power that you had, which was obviously very different than the power that he had.
Correct. Perfectly said, yeah.
And so that does seem to be a theme of your life. And everyone here got to watch one of your interviews back in the day when you were.
Oh.
That's okay. It was no, but was the experience in South Africa and your experience in Parliament, you lifted up global health, I think, or at least understanding health across borders as a priority of yours. And I guess I'd love you to share some thinking about that before we open it up to larger. But just how did you integrate that? That's not a common experience for most parliamentarians, I would imagine.
I think I certainly wanted to do that beforehand. Remember
Yeah.
deciding what to
Yeah.
do with my life as
Yeah.
a teenager? This was what I wanted to do, as naively as that probably is. But I think, certainly being a physician, what affects us, whether in Canada or Cambodia or Kazakhstan, bad things happen. So maybe we can apply the knowledge that we have to be able to prevent some of that. So I think in Parliament, it's not a popular thing to do from a constituency perspective, so you have to be careful
Yeah.
to make sure that you're definitely dealing with the needs of your constituents. But also on the other side, I don't think it precludes us from being able to do that which is right. I think no matter where we live, just because I'm Canadian, I didn't feel, being privileged in where I lived, I think we have a moral, I felt I had a moral obligation to do more, to reach out to that, as you said, for those who
Yeah.
don't have a voice and can't speak out. Maybe I can do something in some small way to do that. So that's why I use the power of the office to be able to assert that. And I did it in a way that is, if you do this in politics, you have to be very careful, because this is, as John, this is a rate limiting step
Yes.
politically. So,
Yes, it is.
So you have to, before I went into politics, I decided on some red lines, right? Where were the things I would not cross? One, at least from our perspective, that's not a good thing within the political systems that we have today, because loyalty matters more. And one whip said to me, he said, because I wasn't backing down on something, he said, Keith, your problem is that you'd rather do the right thing than side with the party. And I said, yeah, there are lines, Jim, in the sand that I won't cross. And that is, in fact, because I spent my first period from 93 to 2003 in one party, the Conservative Party, and then I left and ran to be the candidate for the Liberal Party, got that nomination, ran as a Liberal in a riding that had not elected a Liberal since 1968, and we won in that. So, the reason why I left, well, I'll give you an example, because it has an American story to it. Mr. Harper, Stephen Harper, was my boss at the time in my party, when I was a member of the Reformed Conservative Party. And I was the shadow minister for international development. And so the decision came, my party wanted.
And the shadow minister is, you're out of government, right? No,
Yeah,
explain this.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about that. I should use inside the Beltway stuff in Canada.
Inside the Ottawa Beltway.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's government, you're in government and you have a cabinet, right? So what happens in our system, parliamentary system, is that the opposition has a shadow minister. So if you're the Secretary of State, there is over here the shadow Secretary of State. So we have a Minister of Foreign Affairs, so you'd be the shadow Minister of Foreign Affairs, and on it goes through defense, development, health, et cetera, Well, here would be your cabinet, but here would be your shadow minister. So you would be the major person to keep an eye on you. So, so Lily would be the major person to keep an eye on you, Fritzy, and she would be going and keeping your toes to the fire to make sure you don't do anything wrong or just bashing you in question period. It's an ugly situation, but it is how we have accountability.
Right, so anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
just
no,
explain
thank
the
you,
cause.
yeah. So that's, no, thanks for doing that, so that's how the structure works. So I was in the international development space, and so my party asserted that we should join the United States in invading Iraq. Now my constituency, my district, is on Vancouver Island, which is the largest military base in Western Canada. You know, amazing people. So my party leader, Mr. Harper, said we are asserting this, that Canada should join the United States in Iraq. And I said to him, I'm not going to support this. And I voted against it. Two of us voted against it. One who's a pacifist, I'm not a pacifist. And then another was myself. And so I remember sitting with Mr. Harper in his official residence, and he said to me, Keith, why did you do that? And I said, I explained to you in caucus that we should not be doing this because the weapons inspector, Hans Blix, had full reign in Iraq, could go wherever he wanted. Saddam Hussein was contained, he was not a danger. The yellow cake, the uranium that they thought might have been in West Africa was not found, was proven to be false. So the question is, to me, is if you're going to go and make one of the most consequential decisions that you have to make if you are a leader of a country, which is, do you go to war or not, you better have a absolutely concrete, hard and fast reason for doing it. His reason for doing it was that the United States is our best friend, and therefore we should side with them in what they want to do. And I said to him, I said, if we are the Americans' best friend, but best friends side with them when we think they're right, and oppose them and tell them they're wrong when they think they're wrong. Otherwise, we're not very good friends if we don't tell our best friends when they're wrong. And I said, also, if you invade now, 200,000 people, mostly children, are going to die, according to UNICEF. Finally, what do I do if we invade with the United States, and a spouse comes to me and tells me that their spouse, who had died in the war, and comes up to me and asks me this consequential question: why, Dr. Martin, did my husband or wife die in Iraq? And what would be my answer to that? Would it be because the United States is our best friend? And I said to Mr. Harper, that's not good enough. You have to forward think, what are the consequences of what you're doing? Are you making it better or are you not? And I said to him before, I strongly recommend, I said to caucus, that don't go down this road for these reasons. If it come to pass that Saddam Hussein is a clear and present danger, if there's evidence that he's going to do something, then absolutely we side with our friends in America and we go in and we support them, like we did in Afghanistan to take on Kandahar province, which we helped to lead on, which was our, that and Helmand province are the two most dangerous provinces. We did that to relieve the U.S. and enable them to deploy their assets in Iraq. So he obviously didn't agree, went forward, so I had to sacrifice my job. It's a long way of saying that when in politics, I always say to people if they're going down this path, it's helpful to know where your lines in the sand are. If you don't have any, then you don't have any. But if you do have some, know where they are before you go into politics. So at least you feel comfortable in your own skin in this job, because it can twist you in bad ways.
So I'm going to ask you one more question before we open it up to, you had a distinguished career, and this would have been a great story if we ended it right now, this career of incredible influence in as a member of parliament, but then you decided that you'd immigrate one more time and come to the U.S. And so could you give us a little bit of the journey that brought you here, and then we'll start opening it up to the group. So,
Thanks, John.
because that's when we first met, was when you first had moved here.
That's
But-
true, we
but
did.
so
We
go
know
ahead.
each other for 12 years.
It's hard to believe.
Yeah, time flies.
Exactly.
One small thing,
Please.
why I actually just practice, one of the things I found beneficial, I didn't touch on this.
Oh, yeah,
Is if
please.
you go into whatever field you happen to be and you go into politics, but there's some other job that you do that connects you to the social needs of your community. I found it really beneficial to me to be working as a physician while I was a parliamentarian. But I'll tell you why, because I was putting a chest tube in a guy who'd been stabbed, right? So, and then a day or two later, I was going to go to Norway with Lady Diana, actually, on the negotiating the landmines thing. Passed away, but she was supposed to be there, right? So, a colleague of mine pokes his head into the emergency bay and goes, "Man, you have a weird life." But the thing is, if in the emergency department, some guy's telling you who's drunk, telling you to F off, it's a sobering, humbling experience, right? And then you go into parliament. So being able to be in the environment, in the community, in a very hands-on way, learning and listening to the real needs of people, just as some guy, some doctor, I found really helpful, because you can take that back into your political space, right? You can go back and say, in the clinics I work in, this is what I'm seeing. This is what patients are seeing. This is what moms are seeing, dads are seeing, children are faced with, right? Elderly people are faced with it, isolated in the middle of nowhere. You can bring that firsthand knowledge back to your political space or whatever you happen to be doing. And so if you go into politics, if you have an opportunity to do that, don't stop the work you do in the community. I found that a humbling experience, a leveling experience, and also a very informative one. It keeps your feet grounded, and I was
Totally.
really grateful for that. So why came here? So one of the things in Parliament, there were 5 physicians in Canada who were also members of Parliament, but I was involved a lot in the global health
Sure,
space.
okay.
So people would come to me, and they'd come to me, you'll appreciate, they come to me with this beautiful 300-page report that they read, true story. Very prominent, amazing research scientist at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, one of the premier pediatric hospitals in the world. This is one of many examples. Came to me and said, "Keith, we did this report, and it is a fantastic report dealing with children. Please give this to the minister to read. And then when you read it, tell me what you think about it." I said, "My friend, the minister is not going to read this report." I said, "What the minister may read, and what I'd love to read, is, the one staple rule?" So the one staple rule is, if you're giving something to an elected official, they've got no time, right? Your time allocates are like 10 minutes probably, 15 minutes in the course of the day. So give them something that doesn't require a staple. So it's 1 page, right? Can be both sides, a little bit of cheat sheet on that, but give it to them in 1 page. And then they can come back to you. First of all, they're not experts, right, in a lot of things. You are an expert. They're probably not an expert, but you are. So give them this in a way, in words they understand, in the 1 page. Then they can go to this, or they'll come back to you. But if you give them this, they're never going to come back to you. Almost never. So this backs up this.
Which is
So-
why everybody writes a 150-word briefing email for this class, in case you.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Wonderful. So I get these reports, and they're not going to go anywhere. But if they were to be implemented, they would save a lot of people's lives. And then I thought, well, I was always intrigued about what can we do to be able to get this research that's been done, this jaw-dropping, amazing, wonderful research that's been done. Like we saw at the Joanna, at the conference, right? The posters. You walk around the posters, and the students like the jaw-dropping stuff.
This is the Consortium of Universities in Global Health Conference.
Yeah. Well, thanks, John.
I'm sorry.
No,
That's
please.
just my-
Thank you,
this
'cause
is
the which conference is it? Yeah, so thank you. We had our conference in Atlanta. But so we were getting all of these I would get these research reports with amazing recommendations, but I knew they'll never see the light of day in terms of policy and be implemented. So I thought, well, what can we do? So that's why this job came up, looking for a founding executive director for the Consortium of Universities for Global Health. And we have over 200 institutions as members, including, thankfully, Georgetown, which is one of the founding members of CUGH. And I thought, what if this could be a vehicle to try to find ways that we can take all this amazing work in academia and its partners and be able to connect it to policymakers? Is there a way to do that? So I applied and was lucky to get the job, and that's what we're trying to do.
The rest is history.
We're trying to do this.
Well, as someone who's been active in CUGH for many years, we are lucky that you took the job because it's a complicated role, and one you do very well. So thank you.
Thank you.
But we're gonna. So I think now is the time to open it up. And Jasky, would you mind kicking us
Sure.
off? So please.
Yeah, so I mean, like, all of that was really actually inspiring and really engaging. I guess kind of maybe continuing on from what we were just talking about, and you've maybe touched on it a little bit. I was wondering what maybe some of the lessons were from some of your field experiences and like diplomatic missions that really helped to enforce kind of the global health advocacy that you do now and this academic collaboration.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jasky. So, a lot of lessons learned. But one of the major things, a little example. So I was in a West African country that will remain unnamed, but it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And I went with one of the members of parliament,
Right.
and she said to me, Keith, come with me. And she showed me her desk. It was literally this size. And she said, Keith, I share this with 2 other members of parliament. Right? I have a lamp. I've got little else to do. How can I serve my constituents if I don't have this? If I can't use the state to be able to help them? And so, scratch the surface on that, and I learned over time that we neglect what I call the foundation of development, effective governance. Not only in health, which we tend to focus on in global health, but we need, Professor Monahan's a lawyer, we need an effective justice department, we need effective finance departments, we need independent oversight mechanisms, we need an effective independent media, right? Environment, and on and on and on, and health, of course. So the foundation that underpins good, stable countries is often neglected. That was a really jarring moment for me. And by failing to do that, the knowledge that we have can't be implemented because the structures needed to implement them, the people, the funding, the structures, the laws, the regulations, the ability to enforce those laws are not there. So it's settled in one of your questions. If failing that, what you get is conflict, corruption, and a lack of capacity to deliver. So public programs are not delivered. I remember we do these leader interviews. And if you get a chance to read a book called The Looting Machine by Tom Burgess, The Looting Machine by Tom Burgess. Tom is the lead investigative reporter for the Financial Times. And I read, and one of my travels, to answer your question, Jasky, a lot of the countries that are desperately poor on one side are on the other side fabulously rich in natural resources, right? So wherever I went, the untended cancer of corruption was eviscerating and a rate-limiting step to a country being able to develop, right? And I thought, we're missing the boat by not investing and working with countries and listening to them about building up their own governance capacity. Instead, we work on vertical programs that will last for a period of time, but we're not enabling countries to take care of themselves. So that was a really big lesson. And also listening to the folks on the ground who will tell us what they need in very practical terms. But if you get that book, because I interviewed Tom, and then the Lancet saw this, and Zoe, who's the editor, said, we've been thinking about doing a commission on that. So long and the short of it is, there's now a commission that just started on dealing with corruption, which we hope can actually open the door to a major sea change in investments and activity. But that was a big issue. The lack of capacity, corruption, yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Margaret, do you want?
Yeah, thank you for coming to talk to us. You mentioned you're interested in conservation, and I'm curious about your thoughts on how sort of disproportionate effects of climate change may affect those three C's, corruption, conflict, and capacity.
Right.
And obviously climate change is already incredibly complicated in terms of international cooperation,
Yeah.
but like how can or do you expect that those will affect those, and then what mechanisms do you
Yeah.
sort of anticipate trying to mitigate them?
In this area, yeah. Well, let me broaden it up a little bit, because we talk about climate, but it's not one environmental challenge. It's an interconnected. It's interconnection of three existential threats: climate, the biodiversity losses. We're right now in the 6th extinction crisis in the world, right? Species are being lost. Numbers of individuals within species are collapsing, and also their size is being reduced. The third part is pollution. Our colleague Dr. Phil Landrigan from Boston College, if you ever look at Dr. Landrigan's work, he has led, who's been on our board, a sea change of working pollution. The cool thing is that all three are, it's not cool, but all three are driven by human activity, but that means they're also interconnected. And if they're interconnected, there are things that can be done to address all three of them, which means it's an opportunity. But by addressing all three of them, you can also address the socioeconomic determinants of health. Give you an example. I used to spend a fair bit of time on anti-poaching patrols in southern Africa in an area called the Zululand. Because I work as a doctor, and then after that go down and spend time with the anti-poaching patrols, right on foot in some pretty beautiful African reserves in southern Africa. If you ask the question, South Africa was the #1 economy on the continent, but what is one of the top 3 revenue generators in South Africa? It's actually the environment. And it's not cutting down trees, it's actually ecotourism. So, I'll give you an example. Where I used to work on the anti-poaching patrols, I used to develop a relationship and get to know the families of all the rangers over time. So they'd take me into their villages, and they'd say, look, we have this conservancy, this land area that's ours. We can manage this and generate all kinds of resources there. So you could raise game, right? Do a whole lot of other things that generate huge amounts of revenue. That revenue can then be turned back into local communities for their own needs, health, education, infrastructure. And also there are sources of food and other things. There are a huge number of benefits by protecting those ecosystems. You protect the ecosystems, those are also carbon sinks. So you're actually reducing climate change. You're also protecting the ecosystems and reducing biodiversity losses. So there's a win-win situation by investing into community-based, it's called community-based conservation, that benefits people, economically sound, completely self-sustaining, and addresses the 3 environmental challenges combined. Failing to do that will cause future problems. An example, climate change, of course, is heating up the oceans, right? pH is dropping, the ocean's warm. What happens in that environment? Fish stocks collapse. Now you're a person in West Africa. That's you're poor, but that's your only source of revenue. It's also a source of protein for you. What happens when the fish stocks collapse in your area? What do? You gotta leave, right? So then you migrate. You have to leave. And then you move to another area, which puts you into conflict with another community, so it can be a driver of conflict. The mass migration of people as a consequence of climate change is a cause of conflict, and it's going to get worse. You know, as you see desertification in the Sahel in Africa, that's causing huge movements already for people. They're coming into Europe, which is causing, obviously, big political issues there. So they're all intertwined. They're not separate. And on the good news is that there's a lot of things we can do to address those triple environmental crises and improve human well-being in a very economically and politically saleable way. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's sort of like the front end of it. I am curious about like after the fact, like if you kind of have a issue like that, rather than sort of preventing. Obviously,
Oh.
it would be good to prevent it, but
So when
reacting
climate
to
change
it.
occurs?
Yeah, what do we do now that it's happening?
Oh, well, to reduce, the first thing is to protect ecosystems. Again, if you protect and where would those ecosystems be? If you look at something called the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, it's the top scientific environmental UN agency in the world, even larger than, from a scientific perspective, than the UN Environment Program. There's a landmass of about 5 to 6% of the landmass that are called critical ecosystems. Those are biodiversity hotspots. Focus on protecting them. If you can protect them, you get a huge impact upon climate change reduction because you're protecting carbon sinks. Biodiversity losses are being reduced. So that's the huge value proposition, low-hanging fruit that sits right now to be able to address. Not addressing them, we have, you said, conflict, economic instability, food insecurity, and what people pay little attention to is that climate change doesn't change on a linear basis. It actually, there's a feedback loop attached to it. So, for example, when carbon dioxide increases, oceans acidify, oceans warm, which means it absorbs less carbon dioxide, which means there's more carbon dioxide, so you get this feedback loop that happens. So climate change is accelerating, it's not linear. And once the feedback loop's opened up, then you get into issues of whether the currents, ocean currents change, which they may well change, and that has huge impacts on weather, and then we're into some much, much deeper problems where, yeah, I don't even think about that. It's hard.
We may have, Leah?
Yes, thank you so much for coming today. Your story was very interesting, and we watched your one video from several years ago about
there you go.
NGOs, and I was just wondering how you see NGOs' involvement, or their involvement either evolving to try and still be a helpful resource in high conflict zones like Gaza, because I know you were mentioning earlier things about landmine and like keeping people safe, and I was just wondering how you see organizations like those evolving to continue to be able to help in these high conflict zones.
Yeah, it's really tough, Leah, isn't it? Because you've got to try to protect the people doing the work, which is really difficult and challenging, and you're seeing it now, right? Aid workers being killed, a lack of protection for aid workers is a really serious problem. So I think investing in local NGOs is often better than outside, and then external NGOs supporting the local NGOs, you're going to get better bang for the buck. Because part of the challenge, of course, is every environment is different, and politically, having proper intel, understanding the politics, the linguistic challenge, the cultural challenges, every place is different, and that's hard for an external actor to really understand. I think there's also an opportunity to utilize local NGOs in trying to build forward in terms of building local capacity. And by that I mean, being able to utilize NGOs to work with communities to deal with their needs in a sustainable way. Because the local NGOs are the best people to know who to deal with, who are the power brokers, who's not, who's a bad actor, who's a good actor, and being able to work in a trusted environment, in a very complex environment. So I think NGOs, looking a little bit differently to spending more time for external NGOs working more effectively with local NGOs, building up local NGO capacity to deal with the social determinants of health in those environments, helps to build up those islands of stability, I think, a little more effectively. But it's a tough world for NGOs, right? Also financially. And I I hope funders start to rethink how they calculate how they're funding, because right now they have to do a lot of reform in my view.
So we can open it up now to others. Oh, please, babe.
Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I'm curious, as a politician, you're our first obviously politician here, but I'm curious how you communicate with people who not only have different opinions,
Yeah.
but are also advancing with action in those opinions, especially when you have data like climate change data that is backing up every single thing you're saying.
Yeah. You ask the easy questions. So, I mean,
That's
Professor
why we brought.
Monahan
That's
could
why we
probably-
brought you here.
Professor, you'll answer this better than I will, for sure. But I think, I mean, you have to know. I always look at it. What's motivating this person? What are their incentives? What are their real incentives? What are their goals? What are their incentives? And trying to find that Venn diagram spot in the middle where we can actually agree. I'm not, and data doesn't, as you so aptly said, right? It's not, data, data's not gonna drive people. Appealing to their emotions is better, obviously, local needs, local interests, but understanding what do they really want? What are their goals? What are their incentives? What are their personal goals and incentives? And then trying to build some trust with them, right? I may fundamentally disagree, but I'm trying to find a way forward. It's for our folks, right? What we're trying to do is really to understand, what do we agree on, right? And I want to listen to you. I need to listen to you, not tell you. I need to listen to you really carefully, right? And then try to build some trust and know that I'm not your enemy. We want to get some stuff done. We know you want to get some stuff done, but I need to understand what exactly that is. So, and then try to work with that to try to move the ball down the field by dealing with something, someplace, somewhere that we can agree upon. And sometimes there's nothing. And then if there's nothing, you try to find the people you can work with. Because say you were thinking of some hypothetical political party that you may not agree with, there's different groups within there, right? There's people you probably will not see truck nor trade with, people who will not work with you under any circumstances. I'm not going to try to work with them. I'm going to try to find who are those people that may possibly want to work with you and find a way forward. Yeah. And then make them look good, right? If you feel success, then you build up trust. That's what happened in the landmines issue. So I'm not taking credit. I gave the government many things over the years that they could run with and implement because they started to build trust. They knew I wasn't going to stand up and say, I did this. Let them take credit for it. So they were building up their political capital, which was fine with me as long as they got the job done. That's all I cared about.
I'd just add, be willing to start somewhere. I think you can easily imagine how impossible it is to engage with people that you don't agree with or that you see the world fundamentally differently from. But even there is, I've never been in an experience where there isn't something that you can move forward with. And that may not be climate change. That may not be the thing that you want to see or that you feel is urgent. But I'm almost certain that you don't have a chance of getting to that issue if you don't find something that you can start with. Something about the school, something about your life together, the neighborhood you're in, the block you're on, the family you're a part of. I'm part of a family where we have very different views, but you got to start with what you got in common, and then you can hopefully move. But other thoughts?
I actually had a question following up on that. I was curious, you spoke about sort of the great efficiency and success of the landmine treaty and how it was sort of such a success story in seeing someone's direct suffering and really being able to create something to prevent that for so many others. I was wondering sort of if you could speak a little bit more about why you think it went so successfully and what lessons could be learned from that, how much maybe of that is maybe a testament to sort of the unique functions of the Canadian political system and your ability to sort of work within that and within that party at the time, and how those lessons might be used to sort of confront the sometimes really overwhelming and intimidating intersecting challenges, like you said, of conservation and global health today.
Well, I think John said, well, you got to start somewhere, right? There's former president of Tanzania liked to tell stories, and he said, story as it goes, one of his cabinet members came up to him and said, I got all these things, I don't know what to do. He said, you know the story about the millipede? He said, no. He said, the baby millipede goes to the mama millipede and says, Mama, which leg do I move first? And she goes, just move, child, move. So, it is what precisely what John said. But I think first to success, I had to engage the public, which means engaging the media. The public can move the political, and if the political find it beneficial for them politically to move forward with something, they will often do that. But getting their constituents to say, this is something we want you to do, and they figure out they're going to look good doing it, was important. But I had to engage the public. And what I did was we brought in victims of landmines. I also brought in some well-known Canadian singer, a Canadian singer, who was well-known in Canada, and we did press conferences over and over and over again. We had somebody from Cambodia who had lost his leg from a landmine injury. So people see it. You know, it's. You remember the really riveting and horrible picture of a little boy face down in the sand in the Mediterranean who drowned in the Mediterranean. You remember that? So hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people drowned in the Mediterranean. So you get stories of 300 people drowned, 100 people drowned, a story that people will not pay attention. But that photograph, that visual representation of a little boy face down in his clothes, dead on a beach with a first responder obviously beside himself looking at this little boy, that photograph was riveting, right? So visuals matter, stories matter. As John said, connecting what you want to do to the person's local constituency matters. Engaging the public matters, and repetition over and over and over again. Those are the lessons I learned. Those help to move things forward.
And the fact that everybody in this class has lived your whole life with these things, the world that we grew up in roughly the same era in politics, the media ecosystem was fundamentally different than it is today. And as you know, when I spent half of last year working on a presidential campaign again, I mean, this is the fundamental change, is the ecosystem in which you have all the media that we're used to and you have all the ideas, but again, I think for you all to reflect on what you know about how to convey images and ideas, that's the future. It's not just electoral politics, it's about how you shape people's understanding of the world. So, question? Any other? We are usually not a shy group, so please.
I didn't mishear you, but did you mention when you switched parties
Yes.
to run? That I think that's super interesting. I feel like, especially in the U.S., we have such, definitely right now, such different parties. But do you think that having like the real life experiences of the policies that you were doing, like you talked about the landmine, the meeting the people in other countries that you were trying to work with, like, do you think that gave you an ability to kind of react to politics in a more like swift way, especially if like health is so informed by social, historical, commercial like reasons that makes it so political, even though there is the real life connection? Do you think that having that like made it easier, because you obviously switching parties is such a big deal, I feel like, in government. So.
Yeah. And it is in Canada too, because not many people do that at all. It's a really rare, it's pretty unusual to do that. And it's really unusual to be able to move to a different party and win. So you have to take it with, if you ever get in that position, you need to take it with a lot of, it's obviously a really, really serious decision, because you also lose friends, right? You're basically severing yourself from your professional network, your social network. You're undermining a good chunk of your life, and it's not pleasant. So when you make that decision, if you ever are in that situation, you know that's going to happen, and you know people are going to get really angry at you. So you have to be willing to take that on the chin, and that's not an easy thing to decide to do, knowing you're like walking into somebody gonna hit you in the face is not a rational decision to make, right? At all. So, but it was,
Any regrets?
no, not at all. Because in fact, the party actually changed when Mr. Harper came on board. I had that contract, right? But the party left me. I didn't leave the party. So if I'm working under this contract and then a leader came in with something very, very different that violated this contract, I said, I have no obligation to do this when I signed up for this. But the party that, I've been working for years, obviously, with the Liberal Party in the opposition to get things forward and built up that trust. So, we were very aligned politically on what we were doing. So it was an easy decision. But the social consequences are also really, really challenging. And it's also, if you choose to go into politics and do sort of this thing which we may go against the party from time to time, that's not a way to advance your career in politics. But you have to be comfortable with willing to do that, knowing that's the consequence of your action. And so before I went into politics, I decided that's what I wanted. I will do that for the reasons you mentioned, John, that I have a voice, I'm going to assert that voice. What happens to me is not small potatoes compared to what's happening to patients here and around the world. So I was willing to, I'm not a martyr, but I was willing to pay that price to be able to do the following.
On here, and then we'll go online. But go, please.
You have a unique background of both being in the healthcare industry, but also being involved with conservation efforts. I'm curious to see how you view the healthcare industry and environmental industry, if there's any intersections, and how you think they could move in tandem going forward.
But the health industry, gosh. I'm disappointed in my profession, I have to tell you, in many ways. The commodification of healthcare is something that I don't be naive about it, but it's not a commodity, right? I would argue it's a human right. And right now the structure, if I may, here in the United States, we're so privileged, right, to have so much amazing research done here, amazing clinicians, public health workers and such, but that's not implemented here. The structures, the commodification of healthcare deprives Americans of having a healthier population. You spend the most, but you get the worst outcomes of any of the developed nations in the world. That's heartbreaking in so many levels. And I think it's heartbreaking that politicians don't take it on to deal with this in a very pragmatic way. And how it's also framed in a way that change is socialism, change is a lack of freedom. But if you're sick, you're not free, right? You're not free at all. So, I mean, President Obama did a lot of amazing things, but there's a lot of things that can be done here and implemented that can dramatically reform and have much better outcomes for the country from a health perspective and also economically. On the environment side, we're seeing an evisceration of the checks and balances of environmental protection with what's happening with the EPA. That's going to hurt everybody. It's going to hurt the U.S. economically because those cuts to the Environmental Protection Agency are going to benefit the few countries, but are going to hurt people across this country, including the families of those who actually run those companies. That's just a heartbreaking waste. Now, can it change? No, our aspiration at CUGH is we are going to assert and will have asserted ways forward, but I mean, it requires political courage to be able to do a lot of these things, and then ultimately it's up to the public to decide who they're going to stand for office and whether they're the people who have the political courage to deal with the challenges that ordinary citizens face across this country. I don't know the answer to that for sure. But I hope it comes to pass, because this is a country of great repository of incredible solutions and knowledge. I'll tell you one thing. I used to come to your country when I was in Parliament. I used to say, look, I'm here. I'm going to take all your great ideas and bring them back to Canada. Straight up going to tell you that. I'm going to steal your ideas. I'm going to take them back to Canada. I'll give you one little example. We ran our conference in Chicago one year, high murder rate. And we worked with the Chicago Crime Lab to be able to see how can we reduce homicide rates. So here's something amazing that we worked with Steve Hargart, a fellow Emerge Doc, amazing guy, and others to reduce, to address gun violence in the US. In Chicago, this small NGO was able to use data from the University of Chicago Crime Lab to identify who are the people at greatest risk of being killed or killing. And you could determine who those people are, you know, where they are, who they are. So once they enter into the system, into some minor crime, you can identify who they are. So this is what they did. They said, okay, you have a choice. We're going to give you a roof over your head, training, and you have to do some work. And you'll get the medical care you want to. If you fulfill your obligation to do your work, you'll get the training, you'll get to keep the roof over your head. If you violate your work, violate the training you're taking, you lose that privilege. What happened is that murder rates amongst that cohort plummeted down. I mean, literally fell off a cliff. Far, far fewer of them who you predicted to commit a homicide committed a homicide. Far, far fewer of them were killed. And when you asked them, they went out and said, well, what did this program mean to you? And they said, this program gave me life. It gave me a sense of purpose. It gave me a sense of meaning. It made me feel proud of who I am. And they said, many of them said, if I didn't have this program, I would surely be dead. That's powerful. And so what we try to do at CUGH is share those programs, which are really cheap, using data from the University of Chicago Crime Lab and being able to move that forward. And these are the kind of things you have in your country right here that are all over the place. And it's just, we at CUGH are trying to share that, as Professor Monahan knows. We're trying to share that widely and work with politicians, share it with them, and say, look, we'll work with you, our members will work with you, our institutions will work with you to get this stuff done. And you will look better because your constituents are going to be healthier, safer, more prosperous, and you're going to save a lot of money. So, anyway, that was probably a longer answer, but that's what we can do.
Joanne, do we have a question out in the...
We do. So this question is from Max, who's a student in this class. How are the current political relationship struggles between the U.S. and other nations, particularly Canada, affecting private sector relationships, such as in the Consortium of Universities for Global Health?
Well, we're not dependent on private sector money, and nor are we dependent on government money. But I will, if I can talk about the relationship between our countries. We're best friends, right? People marry, we marry across the borders, go back and forth, partners, families. We have the longest undefended border in the world. During the Iran hostage deal, our ambassador took your people and put his life at risk to protect you and get your people out. During 9/11, our country harbored thousands of people to protect them at 9/11, and we would do it in a heartbeat, anytime, anyplace, even now. But what we feel is betrayed, frankly. We feel hurt. Where on earth did this come from that our closest friend, it's like your closest friend just suddenly walks up to you and punches you in the face. Like, where did that come from? And so that's what we feel. And so what's really been, the tariffs are going to hurt our country, Canada, it's going to hurt your country. But probably, I think what's most damaging is that which is most difficult to get and easiest to lose. Trust. Trust. International relations depend on personal relations. It depends on trust, predictability. It depends on, we have that trust and predictability. We will put our soldiers with your soldiers. we will work with you and agree to various accords and that we have. But once you burn that trust, it's going to take many, many, many years for my country to get that back, but also with other countries to get that back. And I will say that, our country, we're tariffing back and forth. You're going to hit us, we're going to hit you. But what I said to my people back home is that as a parallel track, the worst case scenario we're missing, and that is the removal of the United States from the alliances that have helped to keep the geopolitical structure after World War II stable. This is what Putin wants. Putin's goal is that his fever dream is to take the US out of the transatlantic relationship, undermine the European Union, undermine NATO, which would and get US to be insular, small, self-absorbed. That's what the enemies of this country wants. What I've said to our folks is, work in a parallel track behind the scenes and do what you can to work with those who don't like what's going on and have, we can't do this as Canadians outside, right? But Americans here can assert to the general public that we can't allow the United States of America, the most powerful country in the world, to get away from the relationships that have provided safety and security for this country and the world, and provided the strongest economic advancement of this country in its history. Because we cannot allow that to happen. It may happen, but we need to, as an ally of the US and the other allies, I think as a parallel track, we need to be very smart diplomatically and work with allies in this country to at least encourage them to push that forward strongly, and then we, internationally, can cheer that on and give them the political space to support that.
Well, we've reached the end of our time, but I do want to say very much appreciate Dr. Martin joining us. I'm so glad that he was our final speaker of this spring, because there are very few people you're going to run into in life that have had such a fascinating life experience. As a physician, member of parliament, somebody now dedicated to helping universities around the world share information and make a difference for health. And also, sometimes you run into people who only have lived in the world of ideas. You've lived in the world of getting things done. So anyway, I just want to say thank you, and maybe a round of applause for our guest. Thank you.